Morning, everyone. As per usual, I'm gonna let folks find their way in while I finish up getting ready. Jeez. Let's actually get that up and running. Gonna get my live chat up and running. And I'm gonna get my lecture notes. Alexa, turn on the living room lights. A little better lighting in here for you. Gonna check out my channel so I can see my live chat. Okay, looks like I am, in fact, live now. Nobody's watching. Check out my channel so I can see my live chat. That was almost bad. All right. Good morning, everyone. And we're going to talk today about the politics of our fair state of Nevada. So this is actually the only lecture slideshow that I actually made personally. Why am I... Hold on a second. Technical difficulties. Why am I so tiny down there? Why am I so big? There we go. Sorry about that. Alright, where were we? Today we're going to talk about the politics of the great state of Nevada, the Silver State, the Sagebrush State, or as it says on our flag, the Battle-Born State. I'm going to start that conversation with a talk about the original inhabitants of Nevada and what politics there is that we can speak of. I'm going to talk about the era of Spanish conquest in the American West, which still has an effect on us today, I promise. I'm going to talk about the Wild West era, the era of the gold rush and the 49ers and the Comstock Lode in Virginia City, and the subsequent formation of both the Nevada Territory and Nevada statehood. I'm also going to talk about the battle that we had between the miners and the Mormons. Let me just say they did not get along terribly well. After that point, we'll kind of do a bit of a recap of the entire class as it relates to the state of Nevada. We're going to start with institutions. We'll start talking about the three branches of government, which we do have, an executive, a legislative, and a judicial, just like in the federal government. We're going to start looking at local government in Nevada, counties, cities, that sort of thing. We of course do have we have America's 30th largest city here in Nevada. That is of course Las Vegas. And we'll talk about the difference between cities and towns and unincorporated territory and all that fun stuff. We'll talk about why I'll ask you why Las Vegas city boundaries look like Swiss cheese, because I don't know why, but I suspect it's probably the mob somehow. We'll talk about civil rights and diversity. We'll talk about the struggle for civil rights here in Nevada on the part of especially African Americans and Native Americans. We'll also talk about recent developments like LGBT rights. We'll talk about Nevada's stance on civil liberties, which is less expansive than California's, unfortunately. And we'll talk about parties, elections, lobbying, and interest groups. And that will finish out the course. That all is probably going to take about 2 hours, about 2 lectures. Um, so probably we're going to finish up lectures on Monday. Quick reminder for those of you out there watching that this is airing Thursday morning. Essays are due tomorrow. Essays are due tomorrow by midnight. That's Friday, May the 8th. So make sure that you have your essays in. That is really, really important. Anything else I need to tell you folks? Can't think of it. Let's get started. So, I wanted to talk about, because this is actually the first lecture that I'm actually writing for this course. Most of the rest of them are provided by the textbook publisher, and they don't pay me enough to reinvent the wheels, so I don't. I just try and cover it in glitter. That's all. But when I decided to make a lecture, I decided that I wanted to first start with the Aboriginal peoples of Nevada. We can't pretend that human settlement started here in Nevada in the 1850s. That there have been, in fact, people here for tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years prior to European contact. So I wanted to talk about these tribes' culture, their history, their politics, and what sort of political institutions that they set up. And we'll talk about why that actually gets to be very problematic here in a bit. So historical tribes here in Nevada, we can take a look at the excellent native land map. And you'll see that here, this is the Las Vegas Valley, there's Lake Mead, right? You can see here that the Las Vegas Valley was actually frequented by a number of different tribes, including the Shoshone, the Paiute, the Wallapai, the Chemehuevi, and the Mojave, all of whom were in this area reasonably often. Throughout much of the rest of Nevada, it is the Paiute and Shoshone that end up being mainly dominant, though you do see a big offshoot of the Goshute, the northern Paiute up here, the Washoe are in here somewhere. There's the Washoe, so that's like Washoe County, that's Reno, that area. So those are the tribes that would have lived in these areas, and most of these tribes belong to what anthropologists refer to as the Great Basin culture. Great Basin culture was a set of various nations, various cultural identities that resided in what is today the Great Basin. Now, when these people originally settled the area, it was probably a shallow inland sea. Something that provided fertile ground for hunting and fishing and all that sort of stuff. But since then, in the subsequent several dozen thousand years, obviously Nevada has gotten a bit drier. And so the Great Basin cultures tend to be defined by that limited population, limited resources within their territories. When you live in Nevada and it's an empty, barren desert, you don't have a whole lot of water, you don't have a whole lot of wildlife, probably can't support a whole lot of agriculture just because the resources of the land are very limited. And so that led to a culture of hunter-gatherers, really couldn't support a whole lot in the way of agriculture, who were very nomadic. His tribes would have lived in small family groups in the summer, and at most small temporary villages during the winter. I have a tab open for that. So this is what a Paiute dwelling would have looked like in one of these small winter villages. You can actually see a recreation of one of these villages at the Springs Preserve here in Las Vegas. But because of this relatively low population culture, I mean, we're talking about people would have spent most of their times in family groups of a couple dozen people. A village over winter might have had 100, 150 tops. We didn't really see much of any sort of proper politics, right? I can't really talk about the political institutions of the Great Basin cultures because we don't really know that there were all that many political institutions among these cultures. We do know that they would have elected a village headsman for these overwintering villages. That position was temporary. It was elected each year, and that was about all I can say in terms of formal institutions. All of this is all complicated by the fact that you'll notice when we look at this map, notice that unlike, you say, a map of the area today where we have these very defined lines and you are either in Nevada or you are in California. Well, tell me, are you in, if you're sitting here in in right where we are at CSN, which is not necessarily where all of you are, but I can see the landforms, so give me a second. There's Sahara Lake, so CSN is somewhere in this region. I'm pretty sure that's actually the detention basin behind the campus. So CSN somewhere in this region, right? Are we on Shoshone or Paiute land here? Well, it's really hard to tell. All of these tribes would have ranged through the Las Vegas Valley at various times throughout their history. Indeed, the valley was something of a meeting place of various different cultures. And even just the overlapping boundaries are one thing, but these people would have intermarried, right? They would have ran into each other, they would have intermarried, they would have shared language and cultural history. So the boundaries between, Shoshone and Paiute, and between Paiute and Mojave, they're much more fluid than the boundaries between modern nations today. Complicating this even further is the fact that Native Americans, many Native American tribes, not all of them, but many, had an unwritten culture, had an oral culture. And as we discussed in our overview of the Civil Rights chapter, many Native American tribes were subject to forced dispossession from that culture. Remember, their lands were taken from the tribe in common and given to individual families. Their children were taken from the tribe entirely and raised in residential schools where they were forbidden to practice their cultures. And so therefore, this went on for several generations to the point that in many cases we have lost an enormous amount of history about Native American cultures. It's just gone because these are oral traditions that were passed down from one living mind to the next, and the genocidal actions of the United States government interrupted that transmission, so we have lost all of that history. If you're not allowed to pass down your history from one generation to another, it can just be entirely lost. And so anthropologists have been struggling to capture the memories of some of the oldest remaining members of these tribes, to try and capture the languages. Have been developing written languages for example, Shoshone. Shoshone got a written language in 1976 because some anthropologists at Yale came up with it, to try and preserve as much as they could of what remains of Shoshone culture. So therefore, there's not a lot that I can talk about in the way of indigenous or aboriginal politics here in Nevada, just because most of these cultures lived in small enough groups that a formal political structure was unnecessary. If I'm going to talk about Native Americans in Nevada, it would be remiss of me not to talk about contact and dispossession. So, natives in Nevada made contact with European settlers relatively late in the game. And it wasn't until, as we're going to see, about the 1830s and 40s that white settlers really started moving into what is today Nevada. But by then, the Indian Removal Act was 1830. The thing is, word gets around. We don't like to think of Native American tribes as sophisticated gatherers of news and information, because, God, they didn't have newspapers or the telegraph or anything like that. But just as an example of how far trade networks during the time could reach, maybe when you were growing up, morning Kathy, maybe when you were growing up you were taught about like the Mayan ball game. They had these circular ball courts that they would play a ball game, which mostly included their elbows, apparently. But anyway, there's a court for that Mayan ball game outside of Flagstaff, Arizona. It's the northernmost one they've ever found, and it's in beautiful shape. You can definitely see it. It's at Wapotki National Monument. You should go, just because, I mean, it's really damn cool. But point is, there is evidence in stone that I've touched these stones that were obviously placed there to play this Mesoamerican ball game in northern Arizona prior to European contact in the 1800s. So we had trade networks stretching from northern Arizona to Guatemala. Word gets around. So by the time that Native Americans in Nevada ran into, European settlers, miners, ranchers, the U.S. Army, they knew it was coming, right? They knew that the Americans weren't going to keep their treaties. They were just going to keep forcing them off their land further and further and further until eventually someday, they don't have any land anymore at all. And so contact in Nevada was late. The period of contact was relatively short, and it was marked by absolutely brutal, vicious violence. I mentioned the Paiute War of 1860. I'll get to the fragile ecology here first. First is that, as I mentioned, these Great Basin cultures are really designed to lessen their footprint upon the land. Small groups ranging in wide areas, hunting and gathering, living off of what little bounty the desert provides. But now you got all these settlers coming in. And do you think the settlers are coming in from like Washington, D.C. or Independence, Missouri, and they're living off the land as hunter-gatherers in small family groups? No. They're carrying their same traditions of agriculture that they've carried out on small farms back east and on the Great Plains. They're carrying those same traditions of agriculture out to the Great Basin, where we don't have nearly as much in the way of water. Right? The soil here is not nearly as good as it is in most of the prairie states. So the ecology is extraordinarily fragile. Right? Further, you started getting fur trappers coming in, hunting what little game there was here for fur. Excuse me. So, fragile ecology meant each new settler was in direct competition with the native peoples that they came to displace. And that led to, as I said, a brutal period of conflict and conquest over the Native Americans in Nevada. I mentioned the 1860 Paiute War, not because it is exceptional, but because it is typical of the sorts of things that happened during the time. In 1860, you had a tribe of Bannock Indians who came through and raided a white settlement for supplies on their way up to their traditional homelands up in southern Idaho. Well, the settlers at the time didn't much care for the difference between Bannock Indians or Washoe Indians or Paiute Indians. They just kind of saw Indians in general. And so they went to their local Paiute tribe and tried to take them out in retribution for this act of theft. And they got their asses handed to them. I think the Paiute lost like 2 people, and the settlers lost like a couple dozen. At least the first time they got their asses handed to them. But, of course, they went after that, a failed attempt at conquest. They went to their local U.S. Army garrison. They brought the cavalry and slaughtered the Paiute to a man. So that's the sort of thing that happened in Nevada. You had brutal conflicts over resources and territories, and they were often settled at the end of a rifle, at the end of a cavalryman's sword. So Nevada gets a unique institution out of this period of horrific conflict. Because you see, the tribes in the Great Basin, they're already pretty much living on the worst possible land, right? Nevada is just not a fertile, bounteous state. And the whole idea of the reservation system was generally to give the Native Americans whatever shitty land that the settlers didn't want. Tippy, shut up! Sorry, my cat is singing the song of his people. So, as a result, you can imagine that the reservations in Nevada are particularly shitty. Or the reservations for Nevada's tribes, they're mostly actually not in Nevada. A lot of them are in, like, southern Idaho. Well, actually, a couple of them were in northern Nevada. But typically, they were really unpleasant places to be, right? The furthest, most inaccessible, most rugged terrain they could find. Terrible soil, no water, no resources, all that good stuff. And so a lot of Nevada's native tribes took one look at these reservations and they were like, no, we're not going there. We will all die of, famine or whatever. We're not going there because we can't survive. There's just this is just not land that we can live off of. And so the result was the Indian colony. Now, Indian colonies are uniquely Nevadan institution. There's, I think, 29 of them. So we have the Las Vegas Paiute are an Indian colony. Here we go. Indian colonies. You'll see that the overwhelming majority of them are in Nevada, and the rest are in California and Oregon, right over the Nevada, usually right over the Nevada border. An Indian colony is a situation where Native Americans found their reservations unappealing and basically set up a spot near a white settlement so that they could go work in the settler economy for their subsistence, right? So rather than trying to keep up the hunter-gatherer lifestyle, Native Americans did kind of the same thing that undocumented Latinos do now. They worked odd jobs, right? They did temporary labor. They got the shit kicked out of them a lot. But as a result, we have seen these Indian colonies develop in Nevada and pretty much nowhere else. Most of them have today become official, recognized Native American land. So, by the way, the Reno Sparks Indian Colony is the largest of the Indian colonies, and it has about 1,400 people. The Las Vegas Paiute Colony has less than half that, but they exist and are a thing. And for a very long time, the Las Vegas Paiute Colony was literally just that 10 acres over on Las Vegas Boulevard that was deeded by Helen Stewart during the sale of Las Vegas. We'll get to that a little later on. But today, tribal governments are given semi-autonomous status within the United States. So they're given the ability to make their own laws, govern themselves, and so both Indian reservations and Indian colonies are governed by elected boards elected from amongst the people who are members of that tribe. And we also saw back in the 1980s an expansion of land being granted to Native American peoples, including here in Nevada. So I mentioned the Las Vegas Paiute tribe. They have, for a very, very long time, their only reservation was that literally square of 10 acres down off of Las Vegas Boulevard, where the Paiute Smoke Shop is. But in the 1980s, they were actually granted a significant grant of trust land up in the northwest of the valley. Out on I-95, if you're heading to Reno, there's the Chevron there, and they've got a golf course out there. That's all Paiute land. And as I've mentioned before, since they are semi-autonomous within the U.S., they do have the ability to set their own laws, govern themselves, and enforce those laws. So they have their own police forces, their own fire departments, their own, tribal welfare offices, all that good stuff. And those police forces are allowed to enforce those laws anywhere on tribal land, including on highways that cross tribal land. So if you're heading out 95 and you're heading up to Reno, once you see that entering Paiute land sign, 65, because they pop you for speeding, they keep the money, and that's a big funding source for a lot of Native American tribes with reservations along highways. Yes, creature. Everybody say hi to Naomi. Everybody say bye to Naomi. So that is what I have to say right now about the politics of early Nevada, about the politics of Native Nevada. I'm going to talk a bit more about Native people's struggle for civil rights when we get to the civil rights section, but I wanted to get the Native politics out of the way first. So from there, we go to the first European claims on Nevada. You see, originally, most of what is today, actually I think all of what is today Nevada, as well as portions, and all of what is today California, as well as portions of what are today Arizona, New Mexico. Cat! Okay, hold on, everybody. So my little demon tabby has decided that if I am using the mouse or the keyboard, that my hands are fair game for attacking. And while I would love to have her out and around for the lecture, she is actually hurting me. She actually gave me an abscess in this finger that I had to drain not too long ago. So we just threw her in the bedroom. Anyway, so you can see province of Alta California, as it existed in 1824. Actually, this is the territory of Alta California in Mexico in 1824, but close enough. The point is, the Spanish claimed Nevada, right? The first European claims over what is now Nevada came from Spain. And the first European in Nevada was, in fact, a Spaniard, a guy by the name of Father Francisco Garces, who was part of the expedition of Juan Bautista de Anza, looking for a better route between New Mexico and California. Because at the time, you can see that this area, which is the territory of Nuevo Mexico, was actually a very verdant and luscious cropland. And then there was nothing here up until you got to some of the Spanish coastal settlements, the California missions out here that needed a lot of agricultural supplies. So Batista was trying to find a path from basically what is today Santa Fe, New Mexico, to what is today Los Angeles or thereabouts. And he was the first person to set foot in what is modern-day Nevada by kind of so here's Santa Fe, and really he kind of came up here through the Colorado and just came across the tip of southern Nevada. However, the Spanish never actually settled Nevada. In fact, if you had asked folks in the early 1800s if they were Spanish citizens, first off, you would have had to ask them in Paiute or Shoshone, and second off, they would have been very, very confused as to what the hell you were talking about. Spanish never settle in what is now modern day Nevada. The settlements in Alta California are confined to southern and central California, are administered from California's first capital, Monterey. They're very proud of that fact, by the way, if you go to Monterey. So Spanish never do anything with the place. In 1822, Mexico gains its independence, and all of the colonies that made up Spanish Mexico became part of the new United States of Mexico. That's technically what they call their country. It is the Los Estados Unidos de Mexico, the United States of Mexico. And Alta California didn't actually have enough people to be one of the United States of Mexico. It was demoted from a province under Spain to being a territory under Mexico. Again, all the Mexican settlements during the Alta California era are confined to the California coast. We don't really see them get... Actually, the furthest east they get, I know this one because I've been there. The furthest east we see settlement from the Spaniards and the Mexicans during the early 1800s is the San Bernardino Estancia, which is out in San Bernardino, California. So that's the furthest east they get is San Bernardino, California. Right around the time Mexican independence happens, you start seeing the fur trappers come in. So I'm touching my face a lot today. Don't do this. But British and American fur trappers start showing up in the mid-1820s. A Canadian by the name of Peter Ogden, and Canada was British territory, so he's technically British. So a British-Canadian trapper by the name of Peter Ogden was the first person to be the first English-speaking person, I should say, to be within the boundaries of modern-day Nevada. And he would have only really crossed, this kind of top corner here on the way between Idaho and the forests in Northern California. Really, really, really didn't spend a lot of time in Nevada, but was the first person there. First person of American descent was Jedediah Smith, the famous American mountain man and Mormon, who launched an expedition across, again, kind of that northern end of the Great Basin, from Ogden, Utah, across, and that happened in the fall of 1826. Peter Ogden was the spring, Jedediah Smith was the fall. By 1830, there are established trade routes across the Great Basin, roughly along the route of the Humboldt River, which is what you see here on I-80 today, right? Roughly along this route. But nobody really permanently settles in Nevada in the 1830s or the 1840s. By the 1840s, we started seeing, if you ever played Oregon Trail as a kid, I actually have a card game for it, and it's a lot of fun. But the Oregon Trail, the pioneer era, is starting across the Great Basin in the 1840s. People would actually come off of the Oregon Trail. So the Oregon Trail would be up here through Wyoming and the Dakotas, or actually Nebraska. It's like this way. And people would actually come off of the Oregon Trail at Salt Lake, and they would start taking what's known as the California Trail, which crossed Nevada down into California's Central Valley. Again, no permanent settlements through the 1840s. Again, a lot of this area is technically Mexican territory at the time, but who cares, right? Anyway, 1848 marks the end of the Mexican-American War, which ends with, I love this name, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which is just fun to say. And in that treaty, most of, pretty much all of Mexican territory above, that modern-day border becomes part of the United States. Though actually, this lower section of Arizona, including Yuma, and where it kind of takes a chunk out of Mexico, that was part of the Gadsden Purchase, and it was built, we actually bought that from Mexico so we could put a train in. But most of the rest of this stuff, again, all of California, all of Nevada, parts of Utah, Arizona, and some parts of modern New Mexico, were all became the United States, were ceded to the United States in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848. 1848 also brings with it another major element that drives the settlement of the American West. In 1848, gold is discovered at Sutter's Fort in Sacramento, California. And so the 49ers, people from all over the world, really, start rushing into the California mountains, the Sierra Nevada, the gold country. California gold country is all up in here, right? So Placerville is named after a method of mining gold. Fun fact, it used to be called Hangtown. Oroville, Oro means gold, right? So this is all gold country up through here. And you'll notice that gold country does in fact extend across the border into Nevada. In fact, although California calls themselves the Golden State, we actually mine more gold here in Nevada than in any other state in the Union. California calls themselves the Golden State, but it's actually us. We actually don't mine, actually Alaska mines more silver than us, so we're not even really the silver state, but we ought to be the Golden State. Anyway, so people start flooding into California and start flooding into the California gold fields, and hey, people are staking their claims here, and so people are going further into the mountains, further into the mountains, further into the mountains, further into the mountains, and eventually it takes them into the, Washoe and Carson valleys, into northern Nevada. And with people comes government. So the Compromise of 1850, remember the Compromise of 1850, way back when we talked about the Civil War? Remember there was the Compromise of 1830 that drew a line across the nation, and then California said, you know what, we don't want to be split in half, free and slave. We want to enter the Union as 110% free, no slavery allowed, and we're not splitting the state in half so that there can be slavery in Los Angeles. So the Compromise of 1850 is like, okay, California, you can come in as a free state, but as a consequence of that, we're going to let Kansas and Nebraska decide if they want slavery, which they didn't, thankfully. Turns out keeping people in economic bondage keeping people in bondage for the economic good of the super wealthy is not a popular policy. Imagine that. And then empty the prisons. But so the 1850 Compromise creates at the same time the territories of New Mexico and Utah. And let me see if I can get the territory of Utah was actually pretty damn big. So you can see this is the territory of Utah as it originally was created. So it included parts of modern-day Wyoming and Colorado and most of modern-day Nevada. You can also see that the territory of New Mexico, same deal. There's the territory of New Mexico, right? That was the proposed Arizona territory, by the way. They were going to split it north-south instead of east-west. But that's the territory of New Mexico. It includes parts of Colorado, parts of all of the state of New Mexico today, all of the state of Arizona, and the lower kind of corner of Nevada. So it would have included Las Vegas. So that actually means that the first governor of most of Nevada was the first governor of the Utah Territory. The first governor of the Utah Territory was, no shit, Brigham Young, the patriarch of the Mormon Church, right? Brigham Young of Brigham Young University, this ultra conservative Mormon pioneer guy, was the first governor of most of what is now Nevada. You can imagine how well that went, right? So 1856 sees the first permanent settlement in Nevada. It's actually in a place right here called Genoa, Nevada. It was the first permanently settled town in the country. In fact, you can still go there and visit Mormon Station State Park, because the town was originally called Mormon Station. And you can go drink at the Genoa Bar and Saloon, which has been open since those days. Although I think right now it's closed because of coronavirus, but has been continuously operating since the place has started, since Genoa was founded way back in 1856. Incidentally, the Minden Tahoe Airport is legendary for soaring, so if you're a glider pilot like me, that's also a place you might want to check out. So 1856, you see Genoa, Nevada is founded, the first permanent Western settlement in the state. In actuality, it's the first permanent settlement in the state because prior to European contact, Native Americans in the state were nomadic. They did not actually have permanent settlements. So Nevada is one of the very rare places where you can say that, the first permanent settlement in Nevada was actually in 1856. 1856, Genoa is founded. People are panning for gold in the Carson Valleys. 1859, we saw the Comstock Lode Strike, which is in Virginia City, right up here. And again, Washoe Valleys. It's a major, major silver strike. Nevada's first real big silver strike. And you'll notice, this is kind of spoiler word, but Nevada becomes a state within about 5 years of the Comstock Lode Strike, so that may be why they decided to call us the Silver State, considering California already took the gold. So 1855, by the way, was the first attempt to settle the Las Vegas Valley, and that is actually right here. Oh, no, that's a cemetery. Here. Washington and Las Vegas Boulevard is the very first place that they tried to settle Las Vegas. You can see there's actually a creek that runs through here. It's very hard to see above ground in real life unless you actually go to the park where they do actually have it flowing above ground. But the old Las Vegas Mormon Fort State Historic Park, that is actually the original fort from the attempt to settle Las Vegas in 1855, which I think is pretty cool. It's also like $2 to get in, so when the world reopens again, I strongly suggest you go down and check it out. The Mormons came down here in 1855, tried to settle Las Vegas. They lasted a year. They lasted a year before all of their crops failed and their animals died from thirst, and they all almost died from famine and starvation. So they hightailed it back to St. George, Utah, which was much better provisioned at the time. So throughout the 1860s, we see increasing settlement in the Carson Valley. Two main groups. You got miners coming over from the California side, and you had Mormons coming in from the Utah side. And you saw, and these groups are going to clash, right? The Mormon ranchers are very pious, upstanding folk, although they do practice polygamy in this era. They didn't give that up until Utah statehood in the 1880s. And they're very godly folk. Whereas miners in the Sierra Nevada, well, typically they weren't. Mining towns had plenty of saloons and plenty of whorehouses. That upset Brigham Young, who is the governor of all of those saloons and whorehouses. And so you started seeing a power struggle between Utah and Nevada. I also, by the way, really quickly want to mention that that same ranch, the Las Vegas Mormon Fort State Historic Park, was reoccupied by Octavio Gas in 1865 to become the Las Vegas Rancho. That was a deliberate misspelling, by the way. Las Vegas Rancho was the first settlement in the Las Vegas Valley, which at the time was part of the Arizona Territory. And the reason they called it the Las Vegas Rancho, not the Las Vegas Rancho, is because they wanted to minimize confusion with what was then the bustling town of Las Vegas, New Mexico. So this is Las Vegas, New Mexico. It is, oh, they have a Walmart and a community college. It's bigger than I thought. It's also a stop on the train that ends up being important. Oh, New Mexico Highlands University. I guess, Las Vegas, New Mexico's got stuff going on. There's a radio station. Ooh, woo. But anyway, so Las Vegas, New Mexico is kind of over the hills from Santa Fe, about an hour outside. And Las Vegas, New Mexico at the time was significantly more populous than Las Vegas, Nevada, so they called it the Las Vegas Rancho. Fun fact, that confusion continues today because Las Vegas happens to be the largest city in the country without passenger rail service. We're not on the Amtrak network. You can't buy a train ticket to Las Vegas because there aren't any trains that come here. The train does, however, go to Las Vegas, New Mexico. The Southwest Chief stops there. And so it happens reasonably often that European tourists, not being used to the idea that you can't take a train to a major city, will buy a train ticket to Las Vegas only to wander off the train at midnight, because that's when it goes through there, in a sleepy little farming town in eastern New Mexico, going, where's the strip? Where's the neon lights and slot machines? Right, so that actually continues today. Anyway, back to the Mormons. Actually, back about 10 years in time, too. So, there's a power struggle between Utah and Nevada. Right? There's a power struggle between the miners and the Mormons. When things started out, remember, the Utah Territory is pretty big, especially by the standards of 1850. Territorial capital is here in Salt Lake City. And that's still where most Utahns live, is up in and around Salt Lake. Salt Lake, Ogden, Provo, all that. Ogden, by the way, named after Peter Ogden, that Canadian fur trapper I told you about earlier. And all the activity in Nevada is happening mostly in these kind of little valleys here, right? Washoe and Carson Valleys. So when the territory was established in 1850, the people who lived out there in Washoe and Carson Valleys, they ignored Utah. Well, in 1855, Utah got a little tired of being ignored. So they attempted to send some actually in 1853 they extended the counties across into what is now Nevada to try and let the county seats, which were closer than Salt Lake City, deal with it. But the county seats were still actually in modern day Utah, so they're still quite a ways away. When all the settlement in Nevada is pretty much on the California border. So in 1855, Brigham Young sends a bunch of Mormon judges to the Carson Valley to try and impose, God's law upon the godless people of Nevada. That doesn't sit too well with said godless people of Nevada. The judges are run out of town on a rail. I actually pulled up a letter from one of those judges, a guy by the name of Orson Hyde. This is an open letter that he read into the official record of the Utah State Legislature. A letter to his former constituents in the Carson Valleys. He said, you shall be visited of the Lord of hosts with thunder and with earthquake and with floods, with pestilence and with famine, until your names are not known amongst men. For you have rejected the authority of God, trampled upon his laws and his ordinances, and given yourself up to serve the God of this world, to rioting and debauchery and abominations, drunkenness and corruption. The letter goes on to say that if there be an honest man among you, I advise him to leave. But let him not go to California, for he'll not find salvation there either. I gotta tell you, if I was in the Nevada State Legislature, we would frame that we would find that original letter, we'd frame it, and we would put it up in the legislative chamber, just as something to be proud of, y'all. So, Mormon Utah tries to exert its control over the miners in Nevada. They don't much like that. There's a lot of conflict. Settlers start agitating for their own government, starting in 1855, 1856. They also, by the way, asked California to annex them twice, 1856 and 58. It almost passed in 58. So we could all be Californians today, but for a narrowly avoided vote, or a narrowly failed vote in the California State Legislature back in the middle of the 19th century. But anyway, so lawlessness really does prevail until the establishment of the Nevada Territory in 1861. In 1861, the Nevada Territory is established. The original Nevada Territory did not include all of modern-day Nevada. It really only included, it was really only intended to include those Sierra Nevada goldfields. In fact, that's why our state is named Nevada, which, for those of you who speak Spanish, know it means snowy, which most people don't experience Nevada as snowy, but the Sierra Nevada, the snowy range of mountains that defines our state's western border, that range was very dominant in the minds of most people forming their new government in 1861. Most Nevadans lived right here in the Sierra Nevada. So it was originally proposed to be the territory of Sierra Nevada. They dropped the Sierra and just made it the territory of Nevada. Let's see. This guy, James W. Nye, was, there we go, this guy. James Nye was Nevada's first territorial governor. And by the way, Nye County, that's Pahrump, is named after him. And so he was the first governor of the first independent political unit that carried the name Nevada, although, again, did not actually include all of what is now today Nevada. Also, a quick story about James Nye's territorial secretary. Territorial secretary was a guy by the name of Orion Clemens. This story is not really about Orion Clemens, though. It's about his little brother, who had a little brother who was named Sam, and who was kind of a fuck-up. Had been just kind of bouncing around odd jobs all over the country. He had done a little while working on the river boats in Mississippi, just to get by. And so when Orion Clemens got appointed territorial secretary of the territory of Nevada, he thought, well, I'm going to be a big important politician out in this, podunk middle of nowhere place. I bet I can probably get my little brother a job in my office. And so, he sends a wire to Sam, and he says, hey, Sam, come to Virginia City, Nevada with me, which was the territorial capital at the time. Come to Virginia City, Nevada, and I'll get you a job working in my office, and we'll get you back on your feet, okay? Well, the brothers Clemens take their train out to Virginia City, get off the train. They go to meet James Nye, and Orion says, hey, this is my brother Sam. I thought we could get him a job as a clerk in my office or something. And James Nye says, you don't get clerks. We don't have the budget for that. It's you, and you. That's it. We're a brand new territory. We don't have the revenue to support an office for you. It's just you, buddy. And so Ryan turns to his brother and says, "Hey, sorry, Sam. I guess you're going to have to find a job out here." So Sam Clemens goes looking around for a job and finally finds a job as a reporter at a Virginia City newspaper. But the newspaper didn't want the readers figuring out that their reporter was the brother of the territorial secretary, one of the few politicians that existed in the entire state or the territory at the time. So they asked him to write under a pseudonym. So he came up with some gobbledygook that in later interviews he would claim came from his Mississippi River days, although some people would claim it came from his depressed drinking days in Virginia City. And so Virginia City's, I think it was the Virginia City Empire, was the newspaper where the world first read the name Mark Twain. Mark Twain was in the part. Nevada statehood was part of what set off Mark Twain's writing career. And his first short story is The Celebrated Jumping Frogs of Calaveras County, which is from Calaveras County, California. It's a Goldfield County right on the Nevada border. A lot of people associate him with the Mississippi River boats, but he actually learned to write and really became, an author in, early statehood Nevada and the California goldfields. Anyway, so 1861, there's a push for statehood immediately, right? 1861, Nevada Territory is established. What else is going on in American politics in 1861? Oh, that's right. We're in the middle of the Civil War, folks. Right now, 1861, Nevada Territory is established in the middle of the Civil War. The Confederacy is currently its own country, and we're fighting to make that not happen anymore. And so there was a major push for Nevada statehood, largely because Nevada was a staunchly free Union state. They were staunchly free, staunchly anti-slavery, and staunchly anti-Confederacy. And the North is currently the only people in Congress right now. And so they're like, hey, while the South is throwing their little temper tantrum down here over not being able to own people anymore, why don't we admit a bunch of new states so that when they come back, the Senate is just overwhelmingly full of all of these free states. So if you're wondering how Wyoming and Montana get to be their own states, it's kind of a similar process. In 1863, the people of Nevada get fed up with negotiating with Congress over how to make this whole statehood thing happen, and they just vote to have their own constitutional convention on their own, and they figure, okay, well, we'll present it to Congress, and we'll take care of it, right? 1863 Constitutional Convention, not authorized by Congress, and fails over two major issues. First off, and the major issues are both related to that old division between Nevadans in early statehood Nevada, between the miners and the Mormons, right? The ranchers. Miners and ranchers. The ranchers are mostly Mormons. So the Constitution fails over two major issues because the miners kind of try to get a favorable constitution written for them so that they can make a lot of money in Nevada's growing mining industry. So the miners set it up so that, or their argument was that, okay, well, look, if I've got a mine and I'm mining it and I'm paying my taxes on that, eventually that mine's going to run out. And when that mine runs dry, if I had to pay taxes on my land, on the property that I own with that mine, even though I'm not making money on it, I might go under. So they put a provision in the Constitution where mines would only be taxed on their revenues, not on just their value. So mining taxation. On top of that, the Constitution was on the ballot with a slate of proposed officers, all elected together, most of them high officials from major mining conglomerates. And so, though the Constitution was approved by the people of Nevada by about 80-20, it was also voted down by the people of Nevada by about the same amount. But that doesn't kill support for Nevada statehood because the Civil War is still raging. In fact, it's becoming an urgent matter because it's starting to look like the Union's winning. Right? The Civil War is still raging, and it looks like it might actually be over in a year or two. The Union's winning, and so it's critical that Nevada get statehood now before the South comes back to Congress. So thanks to overwhelming support for statehood among then resident Nevadans and some political anxiety on the part of Congress, Nevada held an 1864 convention for statehood, where there was the same division between the miners and the Mormons. And by the way, they mostly just reused the Constitution that they came up with in 1863, which also, by the way, was mostly cut and paste from the California state constitution. I kind of felt bad when I started teaching Nevada politics to, people who've grown up in Nevada and stuff like that. But, 29 of the 34 people who signed the Nevada state constitution were from California. So Californians being part of Nevada politics is a long-standing tradition. Californians invented Nevada politics. But anyway, so the 1864's convention's main compromise was they left that sweetheart tax provision for mines, and so still to this day, mines in Nevada are only taxed on their revenues, not on their property value. But they agreed to approve the Constitution and hold separate elections later for office holders. That was enough to get it through. 8-1 again. The people of Nevada approved the new 1864 Constitution in late October 1864. Well, federal elections are happening in early November 1864. So the Congress, by the way, biting their nails over all this, has at this point, so normally Congress has to sign off on any new states. Congress has actually already agreed. They said, you know what, we're going to let President Lincoln approve the Nevada State Constitution. It's the only time it's ever been done. We trust Lincoln to do it. If Lincoln says it's okay, then we will deem it okay in our eyes. And then they got so close to the deadline that taking the Constitution back to Washington by train would have taken too long. So on Halloween of 1864, and October 31st, the state of Nevada sent what was then the longest and most expensive telegram ever sent. The entirety of the Nevada State Constitution. And by the way, that's not a short document. I mean, it's longer in the modern days, but it wasn't short when it was written. Entirety of the Nevada State Constitution, tapped down the wire by Morse code. To get it to President Lincoln in time so that Nevada could elect senators in the 1864 election. And Lincoln sent back his approval the same day. Halloween 1864, Nevada becomes a state, which I think is honestly cooler than... that's right, it's Nevada Day is the 29th. Nevada Day is the 29th, that's when the Constitution is approved by the people. It is approved by Lincoln on the 31st. And I honestly think that, cooler than Battle-born, we could be Halloween-born. Be equally true. So 1864, in November of 1864, literally a week later, the state of Nevada holds their first Senate elections, and former territorial governor James Nye is elected to become Nevada's first United States senator. Okay, so this is the new state of Nevada as it originally existed in 1864. You'll notice Utah looks a little fat. You can also see that the Arizona Territory in this area is disputed by the Confederate States of America. That this green area is a different country, the Confederate States of America, And Kentucky, Missouri, and the Indian Territory are all claimed by the Confederates. You can see that by 1865, there is no extra country down on the southern half of the United States anymore. And also that Nevada's gotten a little bit bigger, and Utah's gotten a bit smaller. Utah slimmed down. You can also see Russian America and the Kingdom of Hawaii. And then finally, in 1867, we see the Nevada that we know and love today, with the southern parts of the state extending their boundary from this latitude line down to the Colorado River. So in 1867, the Las Vegas Valley, formerly Piute County, Arizona, becomes part of what was originally Lincoln County, Nevada. Clark County isn't formed for another about 40 years. Las Vegas Valley joins Lincoln County, Nevada in 1867, and there are like seriously half a dozen people living here on one ranch, and that's it. I think I'm going to go through the legislature today, and then we'll call that there, and we'll talk about the executive, judiciary, and all that other good stuff as we go forward. So the Nevada State Assembly. I had this page up. The Nevada State Assembly and the Nevada State Senate make up the bicameral Nevada State Legislature. So we have a bicameral legislature. We have 42 members of the Assembly, 21 members of the Senate. The Constitution allows the Senate to be at most half the size of the Assembly. So we have the biggest Senate we're legally allowed to possibly have. I should also mention that we have the third smallest legislature in the United States after Alaska and Delaware. So it's a relatively small body for our state. Of course, we are a relatively small state. Apportionment. So when the Constitution of Nevada was written, it mirrored the Constitution of the federal government. Just as in the federal government you had the House that represents individuals and the Senate that represents states, in the original Nevada Constitution you had an assembly that represents individuals and a Senate that represents counties. And that was actually common in many states across the country. So, by the way, Nevada has 13 counties. Here is a page of them. Open image in new tab. So there's Nevada's counties. Can you imagine if each of these areas got equal senatorial representation? Right? So there was a 1964 court case called Reynolds versus Sims that struck down county-based Senate apportioning, and actually it was in Tennessee, but it applied to all states everywhere. It said that if you had senators representing unequal areas of population, that what you were doing was essentially diluting people's vote. That it was offensive to the principle of one person, one vote. That the vote of somebody in, say, Esmeralda County, where there are 783 people as of the last census, Esmeralda County, a vote in Esmeralda County would count hundreds of times greater than a vote in the populous, 2.5 million strong or so Clark County. So, accordingly, both the Senate and the Assembly are now apportioned based on population within their districts. So there are 42 Assembly districts, 21 Senate districts, and as you might guess, the vast majority of both of them are here in the Las Vegas Valley because the vast majority of Nevadans are here in the Las Vegas Valley. Also want to point out that the arrangement that exists at the Senate that so many people try to passionately defend to me is considered unconstitutional if a state does it. But because it's written into our Constitution, at the federal level, we're stuck with it. And maybe we should do something about that. Anyway, so we have terms. The Assembly serves 2-year terms. The Senate serves 4-year terms, and they're staggered, so that every 2 years we're electing half of the Senate and the whole Assembly. Much like the U.S. Congress, where every 2 years we're electing the whole House of Representatives and a third of the Senate. But instead of doing thirds, our Senate's only divided into half. We do have term limits here in the state of Nevada. Politicians are limited to 12 years in any one office. That does mean that you can serve 12 years in the Assembly and then get elected to the Senate and serve 12 years there. But you'll also see how that's kind of a game of political musical chairs, because there's only half as many seats in the Senate. So not everybody's going to be able to pull off getting that promotion, as it were. The oddest thing about the Nevada legislature is that we are a part-time biennial legislature, meaning that we only actually have a working legislature for 4 months out of every 2 years. Those are odd-numbered years beginning in February. So it's 2020. The Nevada legislature has not met all year and will not meet all year. The next time the legislature meets will be in February of 2021. And they'll meet in February, March, April, May of 2021, and then they won't meet again until February 2023. We are one of only a handful of states that actually still does this, although the largest one is Texas, amazingly enough. A state as big as Texas only has a legislature every 2 years. So the Nevada legislature was originally limited to only 60 days in session. Meaning that the legislature would only have 2 months to get all their work done. That was under the original Constitution. Well, back in the 50s, that started becoming untenable. The legislature needed to do more, and so they got rid of the limitation. And so it was 2 months, then it was 3 months, then it was 4 months, then it was 5 months, then it was 6 months. And at that point, it was the early 90s, and the voters of the state of Nevada thought that having a legislature for a full 25% of the time was too much. That the legislature didn't need to be in session that long, so there was a ballot initiative, and they limited the legislature to its current limit, which is now 120 days in session. So it's about 4 months. And that worked out okay in the 1999 session. The 2001 session, though, kind of screwed things up. Follow me on this one. It turns around daylight savings time. So the ballot measure said that the Assembly had to adjourn by midnight Pacific Standard Time on the 120th day after they went into session. Well, 2001 is a redistricting year, which 2021 is too, so make sure that you're voting in these elections. Who you vote for in these elections will determine who represents you for the next 10 years. And so that was what was at stake in 2001. And so the governor and the legislature, they could not come to an agreement because it was a Republican governor and a Democratic legislature. Couldn't come to an agreement. And finally, the legislature passed a set of maps at 1 a.m. Passed a set of maps and adjourned at 1 a.m. on day 121. Well, the governor said, well, hey, the legislature didn't make maps. I'm submitting my own. They were grossly Republicanly gerrymandered. And so the legislature ended up suing, and the Nevada State Court ended up deciding that the legislature's maps should be used because the ballot measure said Pacific Standard Time, and because it was Pacific Daylight Time at the time, midnight Pacific Daylight Time is only 11 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So 1 a.m. Pacific Daylight was actually midnight Pacific Standard, so they are allowed to go for that 1 extra hour. And so the legislature's maps were used in Nevada for the naughties, for the 2000s. So the legislature does now kind of routinely end up in special session because, hey, 4 months out of every 2 years is just not that much time. So governors had been calling the legislature back into session reasonably often to deal with various problems the state was facing. Wouldn't surprise me if there's eventually a special session for the coronavirus, for example. Of course, that only works if the governor wants to call the legislature into session. There was a problem with Governor Jim Gibbons, whose name is actually on the building that we used to meet in. Governor Jim Gibbons was not very well liked, and the legislature wanted to impeach him. But the legislature wasn't in session, and only the governor had the power to call the legislature into session. So they actually had to wait until the next election. But the next time the legislature had the power to do so, they passed a constitutional amendment that now allows the legislature to call themselves into session with a 2/3 vote. So just in case we get any governors that need to be impeached down the line, the legislature now has the power to do that as of 2013. Somebody made a mistake there. If you want to join the Nevada legislature, you do need to be 21 years of age. You must be a qualified elector, which doesn't even mean that you have to be registered to vote, but it means that you have to be eligible to register to vote. So, over the age of 21, U.S. citizen, not a felon, all that good stuff. And you have to have lived in Nevada for 1 year. There was also originally the requirement for voting in Nevada, but the Supreme Court kicked it down to a month, and we'll talk about that later on. Organization looks very, very, very similar to the federal Congress. Just like the House, you have a Speaker of the Assembly, who is the presiding officer of the Assembly and a major spokesperson for their party in the state. You have the Lieutenant Governor, who has the power, like the Vice President, to preside over the Senate, but like the Vice President, rarely uses it. You have majority and minority leaders and majority and minority whips in both houses, just like in the federal system. And just like in the federal system, we have committees that are extremely powerful in terms of their areas of jurisdiction. Unlike the federal legislature, though, we have an agency called the Legislative Services Bureau, which is more important than the corresponding Congressional Research Service, because in Nevada, they actually write the bills. Members of the Assembly, their staffs don't actually write the bills. They send in what's called a bill draft request, and they say, hey, there ought to be a law, and then the actual law is written by staff. And so those committees and the Legislative Services Bureau can be enormously powerful just because we have such a part-time legislature. They're the people who actually end up being in Carson City year in and year out, right? Lawmaking process is broadly similar to the federal government, so you can just kind of copy-paste that Congress flowchart back into the Nevada flowchart, with a few exceptions. One, unlike the federal government, there are no restrictions on where certain bills have to start. So federal government, remember, revenue bills have to originate in the House. In Nevada, there are no such restrictions. There are, however, restrictions on doing things like, I told you about that Senate tactic gut and amend, where they take the whole bill, delete it all, insert their own, and call it a House bill. So you can't do that in Nevada. We do have a one topic per bill rule. Non-germane amendments are prohibited, meaning that you can't submit an amendment to, say, defund Planned Parenthood at the end of a defense appropriations bill, like they do in the federal government reasonably often. They also need a majority of the full body required to approve things. Now, that was actually a measure intended to blunt the power of Northern Nevada. Because think of it, back in the 1860s, 1860s through like the 1890s, the representatives from Southern Nevada would have had to travel by, steam train or horseback or stagecoach to get to Carson City in order to vote on things, whereas the folks who lived in like Carson City and Reno and Genoa and Virginia City and all that could very easily get to the legislature and vote on stuff. So accordingly, you need a majority of the whole legislature, because they didn't want Carson City legislators being like, okay, the Southern Nevada people, they just left, so let's pass all the laws that we want, right? Finally, like California, there is a voter-improved initiative that requires a 2/3 vote for tax increases. Fortunately, it does not hamstring our commercial property tax rates in the same way that California's Prop 13 does, but we do still need a 2/3 vote for tax increases. Now, with the current state of the Assembly the way it is, 29 Democrats to 13 Republicans, and 13 Democrats to 8 Republicans in the Senate. Sorry, there's a there's the graph. You can see overwhelming Democratic majorities in both houses. In fact, just one vote shy of having a 2/3 Democratic majority in both houses. So one senator is standing in the way of the Nevada Democrats' ability to actually raise taxes right now. Which is probably something that they're going to have to do because, our entire society is collapsing and our government revenues have dropped 50% year over year. Anyway, that's as far as I'm going to get today. We're going to start talking about the executive, the judiciary, and, elections and parties and all that good stuff. Civil rights, civil liberties. When we come back on Monday morning at 10. With any luck, that should be my last lecture. But we may spill over to another Thursday lecture. I'm gonna try and do better and do another review quiz on Thursday. Until I see you then, stay in place, keep your space, cover your face. Essays due tomorrow at midnight, and stay safe out there. Hope that you all are learning and enjoying the class still, and I'll see y'all on Monday.